What does the future energy landscape look like when geopolitics and security become a central part of the equation? Julianne Smith, former US ambassador to NATO, shares her perspective on why energy infrastructure is increasingly equal to national security, and why Europe's ability to stand united is critical for both businesses and citizens. Julianne Smith brings the vantage point of diplomacy and security, where every supply route carries political weight and every dependency shapes alliances.
Energy security and energy in general wasn't always a key feature of work in the national security space, but increasingly over the past decade or two, we've seen countries focus on energy as a geostrategic challenge. And that has evolved because of a number of reasons. One, we've seen our adversaries actually go after our energy sector and create some vulnerabilities for all of us, whether it's looking at our supply chains or critical infrastructure. But two, we've also started to see the vulnerabilities that can exist when you rely on just a single source of energy. And so looking forward, what's interesting now is you're finding energy experts coming into the national security community, whether it's in an individual national government or in institutions like the European Union, like the NATO alliance, or even the United Nations. I think countries around the world, but especially countries in Europe over the last 3 years, have learned some hard lessons about over-reliance on Russian oil and gas. When there is some sort of flashpoint, as there has been in Ukraine these last 3.5 years, almost 4 years, we've watched the Russians try and utilize their energy relationships across Europe as a lever of coercion and influence. So Europe has had to take some drastic moves. Germany, for example, has found itself dramatically, almost overnight, reducing its reliance on Russian oil and gas. And for many other countries around Europe, they've had to do something similar. Many are also looking to see if other vulnerabilities exist. Perhaps they rely on other single source contracts. The key here is to diversify. And also what I see as a strength in the Nordic region is this increasing reliance on clean energy, green energy, as a way to diversify your energy sources and eliminate some of those vulnerabilities that can exist when there is a conflict or some sort of tension out in the wider world. NATO has certainly started to do more work on energy security over the last decade and a half, but NATO allies have also come to realize that the alliance is in fact incapable of protecting all the critical infrastructure that exist across NATO territory. That's simply impossible. So what the alliance has decided to do is to enhance its partnerships with the private sectors, to share as much information as possible about potential vulnerabilities, but also to share best practices and lessons learned from various incidents that we've seen pop up in recent years. So for the NATO alliance, there is a certain amount that they can do in the area of energy security. We've certainly, for example, increased our monitoring of the maritime environment around NATO territory, but the key really to securing our energy across NATO territory is working hand in glove with the private sector to make this one of the most innovative and dynamic private-public sector relationships. Well, one of the things I'd like to see happen more in the future, certainly in the Euro-Atlantic region, would be for the European Union to work more closely with NATO. The European Union also appreciates the dangers of over-relying on a single source of energy, and certainly EU member states have experienced breaks in their energy supply over the years, either accidental or deliberate. And for that reason, the EU is moving out on developing better monitoring, know-how, detection, you name it, but so is the NATO alliance. And so trying to get those two bodies to spend more time together in the future, talking about energy security would be time well spent in my mind. The problem is there are some almost silly reasons that NATO and the EU sometimes find it hard to get together. There are certain member states in both institutions that have strong preferences on where the countries meet from the EU and NATO, how they meet, under what conditions, who leads the meeting. And so if we could just get past some of those more logistical challenges in bringing the two bodies together, I actually think energy security is an area that's ripe for greater EU and NATO collaboration. An area of increasing interest for the NATO alliance, and for me personally, is the area of undersea challenges and threats. We've seen in recent years some very suspicious and troubling activity as regards undersea cables, and the NATO alliance is going to have to work more closely with the private sector to ensure that it has the understanding of those undersea issues, what types of better monitoring might be possible, and then what kind of signaling can NATO send to would-be adversaries like Russia to deter them from considering undersea critical infrastructure as a regular target in some sort of future flashpoint. So I would keep my eye on the undersea space, particularly in the Baltic region, probably the Arctic as well. And this is an area where we could all be doing a lot more work together. The one piece of advice that I would give to the private sector would be to seek out partnerships with governments and with international organizations that are focused on energy security. Neither the private sector nor the public sector can adequately tackle the challenges and threats facing our energy security. The only way forward is for us to link arms and cooperate together.
Energy isn't just an input to growth. It's now a frontline resilience issue that NATO must address. Protecting subsea pipelines and cables, hardening grids against sabotage, and preparing for hybrid threats that blur the line between cyber and physical. Julianne Smith's perspective makes it clear that energy policy and alliance policy are now inseparable. Resilience depends on diversification, redundancy, and partnerships strong enough to withstand disruption. Energy security, in her words, is shared security.